I'm Stuart Hameroff, Director of the Center for Consciousness Studies, and one of the organizers of the Toward Science of Consciousness Conference. Welcome to a special pre-conference workshop this evening. I'll introduce our speaker in a moment. I think you all know who he is. But let me just say first that we had a session in here all day today, a forum on Eastern philosophy and consciousness in conjunction with Dialbag Educational Institute in Agra, India. And many of the people from DEI are here, and a number also are watching live on TV in Agra. They're 12 and a half hours ahead of us, so it's morning there, I guess. And so welcome to those of you in India also. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Deepak Chopra. Deepak, whom I'm very pleased and proud to say has become a good friend of mine and trusted colleague in the last several years since we've known each other. He is by training an endocrinologist, a physician, a member of a fellow of the American College of Physicians. He's also, as you probably know, a noted author, having written 65 books, including 20 New York Times bestsellers. He has a number of other roles. He is a senior fellow for the Gallup organization, the polling organization, which takes the pulse of the country and the world, you might say. He organizes the Sages and Scientists Conference in Carlsbad, California every year, which brings together people of the Eastern spiritual, not just Eastern, but spiritual, mystical approaches, together with cutting-edge science in areas of biology, brain science, cosmology, astronomy, and so forth. It's a wonderful conference. He is the founder and CEO of the Chopra Foundation. Deepak is not a name dropper, but if he were a name dropper, he'd be the world's best name dropper. I have to say, for example, a couple months ago, I got an email saying that checking the dates for his appearance here because he had been invited to speak at the White House by President Obama. And to make a long story short, he wound up canceling that in order to be here with us tonight. But I'm happy to report also that he got to meet President Obama in the interim and knows him. Anyway, he knows everybody, actually. He just knows everybody in the world, and you've seen him on TV, I'm sure, and he's a good friend. And once you know him, you understand why. You can talk. He's very down to earth, despite having this tremendous, overreaching view of the world. He is a force for good in the world, a force of nature, really. He is really trying to do things to help humanity, the world, and everything. So, without further ado, please give a great round of applause to Deepak Chopra.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks for coming this evening. Stuart and I have become great friends, and we've met through our friendship, collaborated with some really interesting people. Menas is here. Where are you, Menas? Quantum physicist, so if I get into trouble, I can ask him the right questions. Rudy Tanzi from Harvard, who's a neuroscientist, actually, and also the director of genetics over there, who's talking about consciousness-driven mutations. So there's lots of very interesting collaborations coming. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the neuroscience of enlightenment, and therefore I presume that you all believe that there is such a state called enlightenment. And I want to show you what I think are the neural correlates. Tomorrow we have a conversation with Leonard Mlodinow, who's the co-author of our last book together, which was War of the Worldviews, and with Sue Blackmore, who's here as well. So I'll not talk too much about science tonight. I'll talk about the Vedic perspective on consciousness. And this morning I spent the whole morning listening to the Dialbag group, and I want to acknowledge their presence here and thank them for actually bringing me back to some very fond memories. I spent 15 years of my life also serving a master, a guru, in an ashram, and exploring consciousness in the lab that you need to explore consciousness in, which is consciousness itself. Okay, so I really enjoyed this morning's presentations, and especially the opening remarks of Professor Satsangi, Reverend Professor Satsangi, and I know he's there in India, where it is morning, watching us, and so I want to acknowledge his presence and thank him for actually exploring the very, very rich exploration of consciousness that is part of the Vedic tradition of India and goes back 5,000 years ago. 5,000. This morning, you heard mention of rishis, munis, sages, saints. So I want to start with a story of a great seer known as Vasishta. And I'm sure the Dayalbagh scientists and sages know all about Vasishta, but in the Indian mythology, Vasishta is one of the 7 great seers of antiquity. We don't know when he lived, but he lived a long time ago. And if you go to Rishikesh, Rishikesh is the Valley of the Saints, the foothills of the Himalayas, you will see between Rishikesh and Haridwar, there's something called Vasishta's cave. And it's a little hole on the face of a mountain that leads into a cave. And mythology, legend, history, whatever, holds that this is the cave where Vasishta spent several decades in silent meditation. And in Indian mythology, when you see the Great Dipper, the 7 stars, so one of them is named after Vasishta, the other are other rishis. So he's kind of big deal in the Vedic tradition. And the story is that Ram, who's the incarnation in the Hindu mythology, Ram is the incarnation of Vishnu, Lord Vishnu, who maintains the universe. So he's the incarnation of God. And Ram is sent by his father. He's born to a princely family. And Ram is sent by his father to Vasishta to learn about consciousness. And this story has been passed on for generations. So of course, when Ram meets the great sage, as is the Indian custom, he falls to the ground, he touches the feet of the great guru, and Vasishta says, "Hey, stop it, what are you doing? You're God, you're not supposed to do that." And Ram says, "I might be God, but I've forgotten. So I have come to you so you can help me remember." And that teaching is one of the great teachings of Vedanta. It's called the Yoga of Vasishta. And I had the good fortune to translate some of it in English. It's not published yet. But some of what I'm going to say to you comes from the teachings of Vasishta, one of the greatest seers of all time. And everything that you hear in these conferences about multiverses, about the space-time continuum, about force fields, all of that is mentioned in the Yoga Vasishta, not in the language of physics, but in the language of consciousness. So here's the fundamental premise of what I'm going to say today, and I'm very careful by saying the fundamental premise, okay? And this is the premise on which all of Vedic knowledge is based. And that is that the most fundamental fact of existence is not the existence of the universe, but the awareness that the universe exists. Because if there was no awareness that the universe exists, then for all practical purposes, it wouldn't exist. So that's the first, most fundamental premise, that the fundamental fact of existence is the awareness of existence. The most fundamental fact of existence is the awareness of existence, and the awareness of the existence that there is something to be aware of. And this awareness is the ground of being. It's the ground of existence, because without it, there would be no cognition, there would be no perception, there would be no experience, there would be no relationships, no social interactions, and no environment to speak of. It is this fundamental ground of being that differentiates into all these different aspects of existence. Furthermore, Vedanta maintains that there is no objective way to experience consciousness, because consciousness is an experience. It's not a methodological validation inferentially. When you look at the brain, you're looking at neural signatures of consciousness. But we do not experience neural signatures of consciousness. We experience life as sound and touch and sight and taste and smell and thoughts and feelings and emotions and desires and instincts and intuition and creativity and imagination and choice. So consciousness cannot be studied objectively. It can only be understood through self-awareness, because it is the self, okay? And all the methodologies of Vedanta are based on the whole teaching of yoga, which has been mentioned very beautifully all this morning from our Indian teachers. But yoga has many different branches. One of the most beautiful works of yoga is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which talks about the 8 aspects of yoga: observances, evolutionary choices, which is called yama, the niyama, which is all the things that lead to entropy in consciousness. Then there's dhyan, which is meditation, dharana, which is attention, focused attention, samadhi, which is transcendence, and then there's pranayama, breathing techniques, asana, the postures, and pratyahara, going inward instead of focusing outward. Those are the 8 limbs of yoga. And furthermore, Bhagavad Gita was mentioned this morning. Bhagavad Gita, in the 18 chapters, Lord Krishna teaches Arjuna the secrets of enlightenment in basically 18 chapters through the 4 yogas. The yoga of meditation and reflection, which is, and self-awareness, which is the yoga that is called Raj Yoga. Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of feeling, I would say the Qualia Yoga, for David Chalmers' sake. The yoga of Qualia, feeling, emotions, and images, and sensations, and moods, and everything that we call subjective experience, but from the level of feeling. So that's Bhakti Yoga, and it's also frequently the relationship we have to the mystery that we come from. So that's Bhakti Yoga. And then there's Jnana Yoga, the yoga of the intellect, or of understanding. I would say it's the yoga of science, really, because science is an attempt to figure out what's going on intellectually and through scientific methodologies. And then there's finally Karma Yoga, the yoga of action. Action that is evolutionary, that's part of the evolutionary impulse of the universe. And everything I'm going to say is based on this very fundamental idea that only awareness or consciousness can understand consciousness. Only consciousness can explore consciousness. Only consciousness can experience consciousness. Everything else that we know about consciousness through the usual scientific methodologies is inferential. And although this is a very ancient idea, it has found some validation in some of the scientists of our time. For example, John Wheeler says very clearly that every subatomic particle, every force of field, even the fabric of space and time, derives its meaning, its significance, its very existence from apparatus-elicited questions to yes and no answers. That even Heisenberg said, science reveals to us not nature as nature is, but as nature is when exposed to our method of questioning. So science is not a method to find the ultimate truth. Scientific methodologies are based on empirical observations of what are called empirical facts, but Vedanta would hold what we call empirical facts are actually modes of human cognition, modes of human perception, and modes of human questioning that are asked through a human nervous system. That therefore, everything that we call perceptual experience is species-specific, first of all. It's species-specific, and everything that we call reality is, in fact, an experience in consciousness of basically qualia. Everything that we call reality is a subjective experience of qualities of awareness within awareness. So right now, I have the experience that I exist. There's someone here, but if you go inside my body with a PET scan or a CAT scan, you won't find me there. So, while scientists criticize the out-of-body experience, most scientists cannot explain the in-body experience, because how do you get the experience of being in here when you're not there? So what Vedanta would say, the I feeling, the I experience, is also a qualia. It's a quality of awareness within awareness. And the feeling that I see you is also a quality of awareness within awareness, because how do I see you? I see you as form and color, and I experience you as sound and texture. These are sensations and images and feelings and thoughts in my own awareness. And that the whole universe, in fact, is a differentiation of awareness into qualities of awareness that are experienced simultaneously as the subject of experience and the object of experience. Therefore, consciousness is not the observer, nor is consciousness the observed. Consciousness is the immeasurable potential in which the observer and the observed simultaneously arise, in which, or co-arise, you might say. Not only they co-arise, but they co-subside in every moment, because consciousness, which is the ground of being, is constantly interacting with its own self and experiencing its own self as the observer, the process of observation, and that which is observed. In Vedic vocabulary, this is the Samhita, and this is for my Indian audience here. This is the Samhita, which is the togetherness of Rishi, Devata, and Chandas. Rishi is the seer. Devata is the process of seeing, which is the divine consciousness experiencing itself, and Chandas is that which is observed. But consciousness is the self-interaction, Maharishi used to say, that experiences itself simultaneously as all these observers. And observers are not just human beings. You have mosquitoes and butterflies and honeybees and whales and dolphins and birds with completely different nervous systems and different experiences of the one reality, which is consciousness. The observed, so reality is not fixed. It's completely flexible, and there are multiple realities even right now. They are species-specific, they are culture-specific, they are even individual-specific, because we all are conditioned from the moment of birth into certain ways of perceiving. There is no such thing as the look of the world. There is only a way of looking at the world, and there are many, many ways of looking at the world. What we call physical reality what we call physical reality is conscious agents and their perceptual experiences. And evolution, of course, does not therefore give us any clue. The mechanisms of evolution are not to give us a clue to the meaning of truth, because evolution dictates survival. And so our perceptual apparatus is built to propagate the species and ensure our survival, this perceptual apparatus. And this perceptual apparatus is very limited. The range of human experience is very limited. And of course, then there is the hard problem in consciousness, always, which I think is not the hard problem, it's the impossible problem, because we're asking the wrong question. The hard problem is based on a metaphysical presumption on which our science is based. And that is that the material world is real, that the material world is all that exists, when in fact, if you could look at it from a completely different perspective, which is what we call the material world is conscious agents and their perceptual experiences, and the experiences are all qualia. Their experiences are all qualia. So that's why we have this problem. Okay, perhaps we are asking the wrong question. Instead of asking ourselves, how is consciousness created through biological mechanisms, perhaps we should be asking ourselves, how does consciousness conceive, construct, govern, and become the universe, including the brain, the body, and the physical universe? How does consciousness differentiate into mind, into brain, into body, and the universe? Just turn it upside down. And that's what we heard all morning, by the way. That was what we were listening, and the very rich heritage of knowledge from the Vedanta, which says this is knowledge not that you gain, this is knowledge you have to become. So because I'm speaking of the neuroscience of enlightenment, let me say to you some of the other basic premises of the paradigm that I'm exploring with you. The first is that knowledge is different in different states of consciousness. I'll repeat, knowledge is different in different states of consciousness. Number two, perception is different in different states of consciousness. Number three, cognition is different in different states of consciousness. And number four, biology is different in different states of consciousness. And therefore, reality is different in different states of consciousness. In all of Western scientific literature, you only hear about three states of consciousness. So the first state of consciousness is deep sleep. And I think you'll agree that deep sleep has its own biological parameters. The brain, you see delta waves. The brain's activity is very little to do with experience. You have hardly no experience in deep sleep. And then the second state of consciousness that Vedanta identifies is the dream state, where you have different perceptual experiences, and your brain biology is different in second state of consciousness. And in your dream, you feel that you are the subject of experience, and all the other characters, which are qualia within your awareness, are different people, but they are actually generated in your own consciousness. You, the subject of experience, and all the other characters in the dream are generated within consciousness as subject and object. So that's the second state of consciousness. The third state of consciousness is called waking state of consciousness, which presumably I hope all of you are at least in at the moment. And this waking state of consciousness where we experience the world through the five senses. And here again, I am the subject and you are the object, and for you, I am the object and you are the subject. But we are experiencing a subject of awareness and several objects of awareness. But Vedanta holds these are all created within consciousness, both the subject and the object. That if you were to wake up from the waking state, which is another kind of a dream, that you would recognize that this experience is valid only for the waking state, just like the dream experience was valid only for the dream state. And the sleeping experience was valid only for the sleeping state. So what are the other states of consciousness? Here we heard a lot about the states of consciousness this morning. The vocabulary has existed for a long time. And I'm going to simplify it a little bit because what we heard this morning was very rich and comes from a great theoretical framework that understands consciousness subjectively. But I'll explain to you the remaining states in a very simplified map. So there's deep sleep, there's dreaming, there's waking, and then there's the fourth state of consciousness, which in Sanskrit is called Turiya, which is transcendent consciousness or transcendental consciousness. But for simplicity, I'll call it soul consciousness today. Okay? It's the consciousness of the observer, actually, in many ways. So right now, as you're listening to me, try this. As you're listening to me, just turn your attention to who's listening. So as you're listening, be aware of the listener. And if you feel a still presence or awareness, that's you. That's the I feeling. Okay? It's not your mind, which might be saying, I wish I'd gone to the bathroom before the lecture started. The mind is a conversation that occurs in the presence of being. And that presence was there when you were a baby. It hasn't shifted. It was there when you were a teenager. Different mind, different personality, different body, different experience of the world, but that ground of experience was there. Okay, so that's the fourth state of consciousness, and you can study that. You can study neural correlates in people who transcend. Transcend means they go beyond the subject-object split. See, science is based on the subject-object split, which is artificial. The subject-object split is artificial. Nature is a single wholeness. Even the whole universe is a single activity. So science is based on the subject-object split, which says we divide it, and we say that's the world, and therefore science is incomplete. It's not a method for exploring the truth, but a particular modality of observation. What we call empirical facts are modes of human experience, modes of human perception, even things like subatomic particles. In fact, Hans-Peter Duer, who was a former director of the Max Planck Institute, doesn't use the word subatomic particles. He calls them HAPs. HAPs, short for happenings, or HAPs are space-time events in consciousness. Okay. Science is an activity in consciousness. It's based on observation. Observations are made in consciousness. It's based on theories. Theories are conceived in consciousness. It's based on observations, theory, and experiment, which are designed in consciousness. So science is the offspring of consciousness, and it depends on consciousness to deliver all the goods. Okay, having said that now, what I'd like to say is that the remaining states of consciousness are called soul consciousness, cosmic consciousness, and I'll explain these to you in a few moments because we're going to talk about the neuroscience of consciousness. So there's soul consciousness, cosmic consciousness, divine consciousness or refined cosmic consciousness, and unity consciousness or enlightenment. 7 states, okay, in the roadmap. Again, I'll repeat that. Deep sleep, dreams, waking, soul consciousness, or you might say just observer consciousness or transcendent consciousness, cosmic consciousness, which I'll explain in a little while. Divine consciousness, if you don't like the word divine because it sounds too religious, you can call it refined cosmic consciousness. It's kind of less, is more secular anyway. And then the last stage is called unity consciousness or enlightenment. Okay, now, many people these days, Buddhism is the most kind of sexy Eastern spiritual tradition, but I'd like to tell you that Buddha's insights were all based on the Vedanta. In fact, he simplified them because the Vedanta was too abstract for a lot of people who had lost the experience. So Buddha is a later simplified version of Vedanta. Now, let's, for simplicity, because I also just wrote my book, Spiritual Solutions, this week, I try to explain these concepts in a way that might be easily understood. So before I go into the neuroscience of enlightenment, let me share with you the basis of my book, Spiritual Solutions, which will actually lay the groundwork for the neuroscience of enlightenment. So the 4 goals of life in our tradition and in the Vedic tradition, the 4 goals of life in Sanskrit are artha. You know what artha means? Our Indian friends know. It means money. Okay, it means material things. It means success and achievement. In a way, they follow the hierarchy of needs that Abraham Maslow talks about, except he extended them. So the first is material success, the earliest phase of development. The second, as our awareness expands, is relationships, or kama, which also includes pleasure, love, sex, and all sensual experience in all its forms. The third goal of life is called dharma. Dharma means higher consciousness, expanding consciousness in the direction of evolution of consciousness. And the fourth goal in Vedanta is moksha, which means freedom, literally, and freedom from conditioned consciousness. So conditioned consciousness is what we call the ego personality, which is an impermanent pattern of behavior of universal consciousness. Okay? So conditioning, of course, can be conditioning through culture, through media, through parents, through religion, through history, through mythology, all these condition consciousness and localize it. And so the ultimate goal of life is to go beyond all conditioning. Okay? And that's freedom, to find consciousness as the immeasurable potential of all that was, all that is, and all that will be. All observers, all modes of observation, and all objects of observation. These are the 4 goals of life, which I translated for my Western audiences as success, health and well-being, because health and well-being depends on what we call homeostasis, or self-repair mechanisms, which in our worldview are generated in consciousness. And then the third I translated as relationships, and the fourth I translated as personal growth. They're not identical to the Sanskrit, but come close enough. So here's some of the basic fundamental solutions. They're based on the idea that everything in the universe is a spontaneous evolution of consciousness. From a cell to a tree, an ecosystem, they all exist as differentiated aspects of awareness. And that we, you and I, are luminous stardust beings in self-awareness. This is Vasishta's teaching. So before I came in, I asked Menas, who's a computational theoretical quantum physicist and has become a very good friend, I said, tell me what the universe is made up of right now as we know it through science. So 70% is dark energy, which is separating the galaxies at the cosmic horizon faster than the speed of light. and we have no idea what it is. 25% of the universe is dark matter. No idea what it is. I mean, there are lots of theories. We call it matter because it has gravity. It bends space-time. We have no idea what it is. It's not regular atomic matter. It does not emit light. It does not absorb light. It does not reflect light. But light can go around it. But it does have the same gravitational effects as regular matter. Well, that leaves 5% of atomic matter in the universe. 5%. Of that, 4.9% is invisible because it hasn't yet formed into stars. So what you see as the visible universe, with billions of galaxies, and now we are being told trillions of planetary systems, billions of galaxies, and trillions of planetary systems, with all these stars, that is 0.1% of what actually exists out there. And that includes you and me, by the way, because the elements that make your body were born in those stars, the carbon and the hydrogen, and the oxygen, the nitrogen, all the other elements of the periodic table, but mostly carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, that was forged in the crucible of stars. Your body is circulating stardust, and it's recycling furthermore, and it's self-aware. It has cognition and perception and experience. So when I say we are luminous stardust beings in self-awareness, which is what Vasishta said thousands of years ago, is actually what scientists are saying to us. Furthermore, we are an activity of the universe. We are an activity. This is a very important thing to recognize, that there are no nouns in the universe. There are only verbs. And actually, it's a single verb. The universe is one activity. You and I, at this moment, are an activity of that dark energy, whatever it is, that dark matter, and that luminous stardust, which is recycling right here in this physical body. And that includes our perceptions and our subjective experiences. They are an activity of the universe. Don't take it personally. Okay, because when we understand this totally, this is the goal of enlightenment, to get rid of the person that never was.